Welcome to the Lion Zone, where you learn to be a lion and not the prey in a world of hungry jackals and vicious wolves. I'm your host, Steve Johan. For more about me, visit stevejohan.com or find me on Substack under stevejohan.substack.com. And I've got another great show lined up for you. But before I start things off, and if you hear something in the background, that's my neighbor starting up his motorcycle. But I got a great song to set the pace for today's show. So here we go.
I've just closed my eyes again, climbed aboard the Dreamweaver train, trying to take away my worries of today and leave tomorrow behind. Ooh, Dreamweaver, I believe you can get me through the night. Ooh, Dreamweaver, I believe we can reach the morning light. Fly me high through the starry skies. Baby,
All right. So, Edward, who do you think that is?
I'm so happy to hear that song and be reminded of using our dreams to get us through the night, to get us through our challenges, to get us through our dark times.
That's right. That was Gary Wright,
Close.
Dreamweaver back in the day. And I remember hearing that. That was 1975, folks. I remember driving around in my car as a high school kid, just cranking that thing up. That was a huge song, but it sets the pace for today's show because my guest is, I'm going to get it over here and get it right, is Dr. Edward Tick. He has been working to heal invisible wounds of war and violent trauma for over 40 years. He is honored for his groundbreaking work in the spiritual, holistic, and community-based healing of veterans and other survivors of severe violence who suffer post-traumatic stress disorder and moral injury. He has published breakthrough books in this field, including the award-winning War in the Soul, and his work introduced the ancient concept of soul wounding and how to heal it with modern-day in our modern-day military veteran and trauma studies world. He is a nonfiction writer and poet. He is a transformational healer, holistic psychotherapist, educator, consultant, and international journey guide. And I got that from his book. So tell me about your latest book. Before you tell me about your latest book, but just tell me the title of your latest book.
My latest published book is called Soul Medicine.
And it's
And
go ahead.
sorry, it's available on Amazon. It came out about a year ago, and it does include work on healing our wounds of war and some of my work with warriors. But that book focuses extensively on the various ancient Greek healing traditions that are the roots of medicine and psychology in our modern world, and how we can go back, recover those roots of our healing practices and use them today for more comprehensive, holistic, and psychospiritually based healing.
That is wonderful. I'm trying to get things dialed in over here on my, yep, there we go. So I know you've done work with dreams and that kind of thing, because that's why I brought that in. But I want you to take us through your own story, because you didn't start working with people and healing their wounds, healing their post-traumatic stress syndrome and all that. And we're going to get into that as we go into the show. But tell us how you got your journey. Where'd your journey begin and what led you to 40 years of doing this?
I'm going to go back even earlier to where I experienced my journey truly beginning. So I'm 73 now. I was born in the inner city Bronx. My family was very poor. We had a small tenement apartment. So I'm sharing with our friends out in the world that my journey began with what would Jung would call a big dream or a vision when I was 4 years old in this tiny tenement apartment in the Bronx. Uh, and really everything follows from this, and I've been following this vision my whole life. So I know I was four because I woke up in the middle of the night. I shared a tiny bedroom with my baby brother, and he was asleep in his crib under our little window. My parents slept in the living room on a pull-out couch, and I had a small child's bed across from my brother. I woke up in the middle of the night. I saw him sleeping. I heard the Bronx street noises and the elevated train outside my window. I looked around my room and I was wide awake. Scout's honor. I saw a large, beautiful, psychedelic colored butterfly flying all around my room, up and down, and I was excited, moved, entranced, wrapped with attention, and I watched it for a while. And then I called my parents. Mommy, daddy, come see what's in my room. They came running in, and my mother in front of my father. They asked what was wrong. And I said, nothing's wrong. Nothing's wrong. There's a beautiful magic butterfly in my room. I've been watching it. My father just grunted and turned around and went back to bed. And my mother scolded me. She said, you didn't have a dream. You didn't see anything. You're having a nightmare. No, mommy, it's a beautiful butterfly, and I've been awake watching it. No, my mother said, it was a nightmare. Sometimes nightmares fool us because they keep going after we awake. So be quiet and go back to sleep. Okay, so I'm sharing that was my first vision, or what Jung would call a big dream, not an ordinary everyday dream from our psychological lives or everyday lives, but something that is transpersonal, that's archetypal, that connects us to the divine of the universe. So I knew that. I felt that. I didn't know it cognitively, but I felt it. I felt that I had been given some kind of extraordinary vision. I used to say I made a mistake by calling my parents because that dissolved the vision.
Right.
Much later in our wise adult years, I realized, oh no, that was part of the vision also, that I was given the vision that it's possible to see the spirit world. It's possible to connect with it. And most people will not see it and not know about that and remain in ignorance of it and even condemn us for the experience. So I now understand my parents' refusal was also part of the vision, preparing me for being a visionary and also living in our difficult world where there are very few of us around who can really share this. One more matter about this early vision was I couldn't know it at the time, but now I do. Butterfly in ancient Greek is psyche, psyche. Our word psyche, pronounced psyche in Greek, means both soul and butterfly.
Hmm.
And the ancients pictured the soul as like a spirit butterfly inside our body that gives us animation, and it is released upon our mortal death. So I've been working with psyche, with the soul, my whole life. That vision awakened me to the presence of the soul, and it made me different than people around me. So more sensitive and also lonely. Who can I talk to about this? Well, you now.
Right.
Seriously, so I've been following that vision my whole life. And so I've always been oriented toward soul work. I've always, in our exploration of the psychological arts and sciences, always looked at the soulful dimensions. In the psychology world, I identify or am identified more with the archetypal Jungian psychospiritual schools of psychology. But as you mentioned, I'm a poet. And so I really use the humanities and the world humanistic and spiritual teachings to a profound degree. And that can get us to, I guess, I'll skip most of my life until I began working with veterans, perhaps.
Well, I wanna jump in there for a moment, Ed. It's interesting you say you give your sharing of your encounter, your awakening, that there's more to this world than what we see. And
Yes.
I'm a firm believer, I'm a Christ follower, and I do believe that there's a spiritual dimension that all of us can experience. And that in reality, when we're children, we're much more, we don't have, and we'll talk about this later, but we don't have programming. We don't have all the clutter that comes in as you grow and is pushed on you. You see life as you see it right at the moment. And I had an experience, and I don't know if it was a vision or it was a real thing, and I wasn't alone, but as a grade schooler, I remember being in my backyard and looking up into the heavens and seeing angels. And they said something to me. I
Mhm.
have no idea what they said. I just saw this this kind of grouping of angels, and it was brief, it was quick, and it's still in my brain. I mean, even to this day, it was there, and I was a grade schooler, and I went to school, and there was talk of a couple of the girls that I knew, and they had visions of angels. And this is just a little town of Ferndale. And there was some discussion, I remember, and then it kind of just went by the wayside. We didn't think about it, didn't talk about it anymore, and I moved on with life. Um, but I firmly believe that was a momentary time where the veil was removed and I could see something. And the girls that I knew also had this, and we were very young. I think first, second, third grade. I mean, fourth, that elementary school age. So when you say what you say, I have no doubt whatsoever that you had what you had, I had what I had, and I was always kind of a sensitive kind of guy, sensitive kind of guy. The song, but it
Sure.
allowed it. So sometimes, even if I was in the midst of having to defend myself in a fight, I had this empathy of I can't, I can't hit too, I can't, I don't want to connect too hard because I'm looking at I remember having a fight with an individual in middle school, Gilbert, and I was gonna, and I just couldn't. My fist deflected. They couldn't literally do what they were supposed to do, and I think even at that point yet, I was still not. I did not want to work in violence. I did not want to operate that way, and I always had a feeling towards, more of an empath. People say empathic, but just empathy towards people. And I've had to guard that throughout my entire adult life because when you have little visions, when you have, and I've had other things as an adult, you just guard yourself and you don't share that because most people do not, they cannot connect with what you're talking about. So I just want to say you're not the only one to have stepped into something like that. And I think more people have had it than we know. It's just they're just not
Yes.
gonna share that.
Mhm. I agree with you profoundly. And it's tragic that we have learned to inhibit our discussion and sharing of these topics. Like you, as soon as we talk about it, I see the butterfly, just as you're seeing the angels.
Yes.
Yes. So these images from the divine are so deep and impactful, and they belong to the universe
Yeah.
as we do. So when they're planted in there, they're there forever, and we can draw on them and follow them. And in my work, I use practices and techniques to facilitate people achieving dreams and visions, so they can have the type of experience that you and I had, and they can learn to follow that in themselves as well.
So now let's back into how did you get involved with your work, your body of work? When did that begin? Because you grew up in the Bronx in a little apartment. You probably went to public school like I did. And then something
Sure.
came along that said, I want to get involved with psychology and understanding and helping
Oh,
people out.
okay. So you and I were both sensitive boys and young men. Um, Probably many of our listeners know that there's a concept of the highly sensitive person, different than any diagnosis. We're not diagnosing people who are highly sensitive. We're recognizing that some of us come into the world especially sensitive and tuned in and emotionally stronger and stronger, more receptive nervous system. So you and I share that, and it's harder moving through the ordinary world that way. With adults being mostly not responsive and supportive, and also the world of boys is pretty rough and insensitive.
Oh, yeah.
So we both grew up that way. And so from a very early age, I turned to writing, to poetry and literature to support myself and my sensitivity, and also to have people to talk to who understood and explored the depths and the mysteries, because most of the adults around me were not, but I knew it existed. And I had other experiences in addition to that butterfly vision, as you did, as a child and throughout the life cycle. So by the time I was in high school, I was actually reading some Freud and Jung on my own, as well as heavily reading and studying literature. And I knew I was attracted to, well, exploring the inner world in whatever way I could discover. And when we were young, we thought mainstream psychology was the way to do it. And we didn't know back then how conventional and standardized and repressive and empirical it was becoming. And so it was actually inhibiting our free expression of the inner world. So I continued to study literature and philosophy and religious and spiritual studies, as well as psychology, my entire undergraduate and graduate career. I decided by the age of 15 that I wanted to be a writer no matter what else I did. And then what else happened? Well, the Vietnam War happened. And that, of course, reshaped everybody's lives. Everybody who participated, everybody who had to serve, the whole country and the whole world were reshaped by it. So I began protesting that Vietnam War in high school. I studied it early on, and I realized how wrong and misguided and immoral it was. I never blamed the people who were serving. I always thought, like the Vietnamese do, that the American soldiers were victims of the war, just like the Vietnamese were, and that we needed to bring them home and stop the war. So I became very involved in the protest movement in high school and college. My first year of college, I had a student deferment. So that was 68. And then in 69, the deferments were done away with and the lottery system was replaced. I don't know how old you are, Steve. Did you go through this?
I am 64 and I missed that. Thank God
That's a little too young. Yeah, thank God. Yes. Okay. So you missed that. I turned 18 in 1969, so I was very draft eligible.
yep.
So I was preparing a conscientious objector plea. It's like you, I don't believe in violence, but I do believe in some form of universal service. Not necessarily in the military, but to give back to the country and to do our rite of passage and mature us into citizens who give and share and serve everybody. But as I said, not necessarily, not violent and not in the military. So I was applying for conscientious objector. I was thinking about leaving the country. I was also determined that if I had to serve, the only way I could would be as a medic, trying to preserve life. And that's in my legacy also. My godfather, my mother's only sibling, was a medic at the Battle of the Bulge.
Wow.
And he came back with severe PTSD. And so that was my godfather. I absorbed his energy. He couldn't even speak a coherent sentence to the end of his life. But I knew him. We hung out together. I watched him trembling and shaking before every threat, and somehow I, soaked that in a bit. So with all of that, oh, and then finally I got a high lottery number, and I didn't have to do anything. So I continued to protest. A lot of people stopped protesting when they were safe, but I was
Oh,
for myself.
right.
I was well, the big story. So I continued to protest till the end of the war. The war ended in 1975. I finished my master's degree in psychology in 1975. I moved to a rural town in central New York State that was full of veterans. And I was invited into the medical practice in that community. So I began as a young psychotherapist in my late 20s. And nobody wanted to work with the Vietnam vets then. We were terrified of them, and they were doing a lot of violence then, as veterans always do after war. So people warned me, they're too crazy and dangerous, don't work with them. But I went, oh, oh, I did serve during the war and I didn't want to, but I can serve on the home front. And I thought of being a medic, a doc. Well, I'm going to strive to be the best home front doc for the invisible wounds of war I can possibly be.
Hmm.
So I began that, as I said, shortly after the end of the war, like 1976, 77, before PTSD even became a modern diagnosis, which was 1980.
They called it shell shock. My mom used to say that
Oh,
we had a friend up the street and he had went through. My dad was served in the Philippines and then was in the occupation of Japan. But our neighbor up the street who ran a barber shop, Ira Rivas, he had been earlier. So he had been part of what you're talking about. And he would wake up at night and just have terror. And my mom called it shell shock. So they, at least in that day, as growing up, and he was a wonderful man. But yeah, I know my dad, when he came back from the service, he actually re-upped and did, um, uh, I don't know what you call that, when you just reserve, and he thought, well, I'll make some money. But anyways, I didn't realize he had done that until later. We were at my mother's funeral, and his buddies who all got drafted at the same identical time that he did. They all grew up in the same town, knew each other, graduated from high school. They were saying, "Yeah, your dad was stupid for going into the reserves." And my dad says, "Yeah, I guess I was pretty stupid." So that was their comment. Dad, you were stupid. I mean, we served. What the heck are you going back in there for? And that was like a little opening to my father's world. And I do know that he never hunted. He continued to fish, but he never went back to hunting. When he
mhm.
came back, that was like you just no need to do that anymore.
No need to do that anymore. And somehow his service washed out his interest in participating in violence against
Yeah,
other life.
yeah,
Yeah.
he gave his life to Christ in, I think, 52. I found his little thing about baptism, but
Mhm.
he changed. He didn't, um, and he was the most wonderful. My mom and dad were both gentle, wonderful, loving, caring kind of people, and serving and honoring and stuff. And but going back to what you were saying, the whole attitude of in those days of trying to treat individuals coming back from Vietnam was what you were saying to me is it was scary for people, right? I didn't know this. Go ahead,
It was very scary. Um, I'm going to tell a story about my father-in-law before we go on with the Vietnam veterans.
please.
I'd like to relate it to what we shared earlier about your angel vision and my butterfly vision.
Yep.
You and I affirm that spiritual vision of any kind is so impactful that it stays with us. It remains, and we can follow the image and use it for our sustenance through the life cycle. Same thing happens with traumatic war imagery. It's
Oh,
that deep and that penetrating.
yes.
So this is my father-in-law's story. My father-in-law was in the Army Corps of Engineers. So he was in Europe and he was in the second wave. So he was in the engineers, God help us all, he was cleaning up the mess after the battles. And he always said, I was saved because I never had to pull the trigger, but I saw the destruction. After the European victory, he was like your father on a troop ship being sent to Japan for the invasion. And because we dropped the bomb while they were mid-ocean. My father-in-law reported that everybody was rejoicing on the ship, dancing and singing, hooray, 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 we don't have to invade, we won, but he didn't. He said, something horrible happened and countless people were killed. I can't rejoice over this.
Yes.
They got to Japan. As in an engineering unit, they were bivouacked 5 miles from Hiroshima. He was through Hiroshima numerous times. We have pictures of nothing left that he brought home. He died 2 years ago at age, it was 96.
Yeah, my dad just passed away at 96 last year.
Wow. Well, we come from survivors.
And my dad was in that cleanup. He was in the Philippines, and then he got over to be part of the occupation, the cleanup. And so he saw what was,
Mhm.
yeah, and he never talked about that.
Never
Never.
talked about it.
No.
My father-in-law never talked about it until the end of his life. As he was aging, just the last couple of years of his life, and he was losing his memories, everything else was fading. Until at the end, he was married over 60 years. He didn't remember being married. He didn't remember his wife. He didn't remember my wife, his daughters. He had 3 daughters. The only thing he remembered was Hiroshima, his last memory. And he had left college during the war. He would have graduated at 45. So he had a 45 college cap,
Yep. Yep.
but he went to war. So he actually graduated at 47. But at the end of life, he wore the 45 cap all the time. And when people would ask him, he would say, Hiroshima, Hiroshima. That was my education, Hiroshima. And I
Wow.
was there, I saw it. And all he wanted to do in his last months was tell people he was there, what he had witnessed, warn us. And it changed his life also. His career was with GE. And so he steered his career so he never worked on any of their military projects, only on civilian projects. And he retired from the kind of experimental engineering he had wanted to do before the war, just to be an equipment salesman.
Yeah, that is amazing because I remember I think it was my dad's 90th birthday or something. My mom got out some folders and some pictures of my dad in the military and what have you. Um, and that was the first time my dad really kind of talked about that part of his life. But I remember I did a whole documentary of my father when he passed away and presented it as memorial service. And prior to this, I had recorded my dad a couple times, just sharing some of his experiences in life. And he was more animated about his travels after he got out of the service and in between trying to figure out what he was going to do and road trip with his buddies and the adventure. And then he did talk about but it's interesting because all that generation, my neighborhood was nothing but GIs. I mean, look, they all started they all came back. They moved to Ferndale, started working at a refinery. nobody ever talked about their military service. Nobody. There was literally, I don't remember anybody talking about, oh, I'm a, yeah, no, they came home, they got educated or they got jobs, they got married, they raised their kids, and they were just salt of the earth kind of people. They did not want to talk about their past. My buddies and I, we never heard our parents talking about that. So it was a different, and my dad did say, he said, yeah, when we were on the troop carriers coming back, we got to share. And I
Right.
thought when the Vietnam veterans got off, they were in the field, they get on a plane, 24 hours they're at home. They had no time to process the trauma.
Mhm.
My dad's generation got to process that trauma coming across on those ships. That was a few weeks period of time where they got to deal with however they dealt with, at least on that level. And that from that point on, everybody comes back in a plane, and there's no time to
Mhm.
decompress, to even admit that you did wrong. I mean, admit the tragedy of what you were involved with. So talk to me about now back to where you were saying, starting to work with these individuals who had they flew back there in the town, and now they're basket cases, or they're dealing with the pain. So share with me now how that started.
Okay. So your point about World War II veterans coming back on troop ships slowly with each other, with time to talk, to share, to decompress, is very important. And that was one of the very, very many factors necessary for bringing warriors home from war successfully. And mostly we haven't done that since World War II.
That's right.
Actually, in the recent sandbox wars, the Navy realized this truth about the earlier veterans coming home more slowly. So the Navy started to bring some people home more slowly from Iraq and Afghanistan. And just by that alone, they do better than the ones who are brought home quickly. The very first combat veteran I ever worked with was home in California, literally 36 hours after being pulled out of a firefight. Time's up. Helicopter's here. Get on the tow line. They're taking you home. 36 hours he was drinking in a bar in California and in uniform. And the man next to him cursed the baby killers. And our vet thought he was still in a firefight and just turned around and immediately just killed the guy. And so his welcome home was stateside murder 36 hours after being in combat, and then a manslaughter conviction. Okay, so how did I, in addition to, all right, so I'm working in a small medical group in a rural community, and veterans started to come in. One veteran who came in, I looked up, I recognized the name, and he walked into my office, and I won't say his name, but I went, wasn't John, but I looked, Johnny, oh my God, is that you? And he cleared his eyes and looked at me. Ed, what the hell are you doing here? Johnny, I haven't seen you since we played softball together in high school. What are you doing here? And he just shook his head, and the tears started to squeeze out, and he just went, Nam, man, Nam did it to me. We were buddies in high school, and now I'm a wrecked piece of crap. Well, you've got a life. Can you help me? So that's how I was plunged in and how I began. And at the time, as we were saying, people were confused, scared, frightened, and uh, our generation was really split, broken, alienated from each other into the veterans and the non-veterans. And there was so much hostility between the groups and mistrust. I began at that early time to be a bridge between these communities. Uh, I felt tremendous compassion and concern for the veterans. I never blamed them for the war. Um, I understood that they had been completely changed, misshapen by the war experience. I never believed the mainstream line that, well, we'll just help you become well-adjusted civilians again after we've had such profound, life-changing experiences we can't be. And my lifelong studies in the humanities and religious and spiritual studies, I and we were American kids, so we learned about war growing up a whole lot from TV and the movies,
Oh yeah.
and I read a lot. Scouts Honor, I read the Iliad when I was 10 years old.
Wow.
Little bit of my crazy, sensitive kid.
I read
So
Tolkien in high school and Dune and all that stuff in high school.
that helped prepare us also. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, I was really, really curious as a young man. What did our veterans experience? What's the war experience really like? I feel blessed that I don't have it, but I also, and this is true, I felt something missing in me. Like I had not had a complete initiation as an American male.
Hmm.
Traditionally, our initiation is through the military.
Yes.
I didn't want that initiation, and our driver's licenses and college degrees don't count as the same kind of initiation because they don't involve the entire person, body, mind, heart, soul, and really make us strain to learn who we are to prove ourselves. So I didn't want the military initiation. I felt something missing in me. I didn't know how to find my initiation. And I hadn't given service. I believe in alternative service. And I had thought about going as a medic. So all of it came together. And I said, oh, well, working as a therapist, a home front doc with our veterans, I'll have my alternative service. I'll be serving our country. I'll be dealing with some of the darkest dimensions of our country, why we created this insane war and how we make war. And I'll be working with some of the Americans who've been most wounded by the misdirection of our country. So I hope I'll be contributing to the greater mental health of our entire population. And I'll be learning about war without having to go there. I'll experience it imaginally. So I'll be exposed, but second nature through my mind, my imagination, but not my body in the horror. So all of those pieces came together, and it took years, of course, but I said yes to the journey. And so right now I've been doing it for 45 years. And as you rightly shared, I have several major books out on this material. So my books, War and the Soul was my first one. I also have a book called Warrior's Return. So War and the Soul is like my Iliad, the inner world of the combat world warrior experience. And then Warrior's Return is, okay, once we understand that inner world, how do we successfully bring them home? My books on the Greek tradition also include stories about their ancient warriors and how they healed them, and practices I use because, as you mentioned, I lead intensive healing and immersion journeys overseas to both Greece and Vietnam. And it's not exclusively for veterans and warriors, but significantly. And so not only in America, but also on immersion journeys overseas, we really immerse in the warrior and cultural traditions of the other cultures we're visiting, to heal and correct how our warrior archetype, our warrior psyches have been damaged and misshapen by the American experience, and giving them much more holistic and spiritually based healing practices that other cultures have had for millennia and we don't have.
I find that really intriguing, and we'll throw some of this stuff out. I had written down in preparation, it says that, from the beginning of time, when man first arrived, and I believe God created us, he had a plan. And it was a simple plan. I'm going to put you in a garden, live in peace and harmony, be fruitful and multiply and enjoy your life. But there was the tempter, because there always has to be a tempter. I mean, there always has to be you can't have, it's like growing up as a kid. Your parents would say, hey, I'm providing for you. We've got a great thing. We got some rules in place. And if everything goes well, you get to have the benefits. But if you choose not to follow the rules, then you get the consequences. So there's always that part of life. It just, I know Campbell would say that's an archetype, however you want to structure that. But the point is, man was handed the ability to have peace and harmony in a just a wonderful life. And we blew it. And from that point on, human beings have chosen empire. We've chosen to use force, be it rape, pillage, plunder, murder. That's, again, Cain and Abel. Abel was just doing his thing. He was honoring God, and Cain was jealous, and he said, God likes you better than he likes me. That perception. And he killed him. Now, God didn't kill Cain. He said, no, I'm going to mark you. You'll know, everybody will know who you are, but I'm not going to kill you. I'm giving you a second chance, you might want to say. But the point is, today, America has a very long heritage of empire building, of devastating other people groups, of ruining the lives and of countless millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of people. It's countless. And we're not alone. Every empire is guilty of this. They all kind of, at World War II, you saw various empires ganging up against each other is how I look at it. Literally, it was just different empires. Kind of like I look at governments as crime syndicates, and you got Al Capone over here, you got Bugsy Malone, you got Stiegel, you got all these guys sitting around saying who's going to slice up the pie, but they're all doing the same thing. Yes. They're not good. This is not good. They're not good people. Empire is not good. And so we live with that. And yet, like most cultures, we revel, we are conditioned to glory in our empire. And we send off our troops and we say, we're going to go liberate those people over there and we're going to bring democracy. Now, every group does the same thing. They have their own terminology. It's always for the greater good, when in reality, it's for the greater good of the empire. It's not for the greater good of those you're going to conquer or the people who are going to go conquer them for them. And so we've got this perpetual generational thing all the way back to our very beginning as when our first pilgrims came across with the idea of setting up a new empire. Now they called it the city on the hill and everything, but they also saw Indians as savages. They didn't see them as human beings like themselves, convert or be killed. With that in mind, we have a military that is a well-honed machine that not only uses advertising and movies and TV shows to pump people up and get people all fired up, but we've got parades, we've got music, we've got stadiums filled and all this patriotism. And so a young man who doesn't have, or a young woman today, who doesn't have a lot of ideas of what they're going to do in life, they think, hey, I'm going to sign up for, I'm going to be all I can be in the Army. They sign up with no other thought than, hey, I can get 3 squares a day, I can get paid, they'll take care of me, and I'll just work on the boat, I'll clean the ship, I'll work on machinery, whatever. But because I don't know what else to do with my life, and their parents aren't giving them very good guidance, is the way I look at it. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden they get called in. Hey. Mm-hmm. And so this has been generation after generation, and more so today than the Vietnam. Quite frankly, nobody wanted to go in the military except for those who needed to go, who wanted. They got drafted. Talk to me about that, how this has built a platform of a conveyor belt of never-ending amount of young men and women entering in, many of them being swept into skirmishes around the world, and then the outflow of this, because this is a huge thing that we're dealing with right now, and it's not going away. More and more
No,
people
and
like
it's
money.
right.
So,
It's like it's getting worse. It's getting worse. So, okay, I'm going to try to include several of your comments in my response, and we're tying it all together. Part of American Warrior's healing process is to wake up to what you just shared. That, oh, I was a young American patriot. I believed in our country. I believed in the war. I really believed we were trying to defeat an evil person or an evil empire or stop the United States from being invaded or protect our way of life, whatever. And only when I was in Iraq or Afghanistan or in Africa or wherever I was sent, only
yes.
then did I wake up to the fact that I'm not a patriot protecting America. A mercenary working for the corporations.
Yes.
I thought I was going to do good, but I realized I'm not doing good. We're not trying to give them a good government. We're not trying to help their people. We're only trying to extend American power and take their oil wells. And so now that's called moral injury.
Oh,
The,
yes.
the term moral injury, oh, it's about 20 years old. Of course, Jesus taught us about moral injury. And of course, Socrates taught us, but we have to say we invented the concept and it's psychological. No. So by countless American veterans leave believing they're going to do right and good and return utterly disillusioned and with the soul wound.
Yes. Yes.
I went to do good, but I did evil. I went to help people and I harmed them.
Yes.
I thought I was protecting the American democracy, but in fact, I was actually betraying its values. So that's in the core of the American military experience now, and really ever since World War II,
Yeah.
called the last good war or the last necessary. In addition to that, American culture, you're right that parents and communities are not giving children enough guidance and education. So the reasons people are serving today are not, how can I say it accurately? Sometimes they're patriotic, but they're also, I'm a sexual abuse victim and I got to get out of the family that's doing it to me. I live in the inner cities that's so violent, it's like a war zone. I got to get safe. My family is broke and there's no way I'm going to go to college. I have to join the military.
Yes.
We haven't had money for my entire life, and I'm going to get a $20,000 sign-up bonus, and it's the only way I'll ever get any money. I'm a 17-year. These are all real reasons that people
I know.
serve.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing this.
I'm a 17-year-old, and I've already got a 2-year-old daughter, and the only way I can take care of them is by joining the military, so the military will provide childcare for me and my young wife. And these are the reasons that people are.
I'm a gang member and I'm going to go to jail unless I sign up.
That's right. Right. The judge actually gives me the choice, jail or the Marines, which is actually what they're doing in Russia now, too.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Stay in prison or go fight in Ukraine.
That's right.
Either way, you're dead.
Yep.
So we're doing our version of that. And really, not everybody is signing up for patriotic reasons. And those who do are often profoundly disillusioned. And so there's traumatic wounding from the outset, from the families people come from, early childhood trauma.
Mm-hmm.
and whether it's the family or the whole neighborhood in the society. And there's trauma for why we serve, and there's traumatic need for serving. And then our military training is still brutal,
Yes.
really brutal.
Yes.
So other countries, as I work around the world and I compare how we're doing our military work to others. Not every country teaches its young men and women to be killers. They teach service, and they try to teach avoid killing and try not to kill. We'll teach you how to fight if necessary, but we don't want you to be a berserker or an automatic killing machine. But our military does train people to do that and to be that way. So we're also short-circuiting their conscience, their moral system,
Yes.
and we're turning them into automatic, instinctual killers.
Do you think,
So we're training.
go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I've also worked with people in the field, and I've worked not exclusively, but especially with the chaplain corps. And so sometimes I've been, for their entire deployment, I've been the chaplain support person. It's like chaplain support officer at home, talking and counseling with the chaplains this way by Zoom, weekly or bi-weekly, or whenever they have a crisis, trying to help our troops get through their deployment and reduce the trauma. Oh my God, Steve, they don't know how to do it. They don't think of this even as a necessary concept. Bless our chaplains. I love our chaplains. And I've worked quite extensively with them. The Pentagon chose me to be a subject matter expert on PTSD and moral injury for the entire Army Chaplain Corps for a decade. So I spent 10 years training our chaplains in the healing of PTSD and moral injury. I really love our chaplains. They are prepared by their ordained by their religion, of course. So they have religious training. They have training in chaplaincy behavior from the military. But they don't have what you and I say they need, and we represent is spiritual religious training for how to respond to human pain and suffering, and the history of the religious and spiritual dimensions of warfare and military service. The Bible has them. This is not about our chaplains. This is about the poor preparation. When I was chosen by the Pentagon to be the chaplain expert, subject matter expert, I went back and I did really, really intense biblical study for a couple of years, reading every word, every passage I could get that had anything to do with war, with trauma, with morality, because I had to bring that back to the chaplains because they don't have it. They didn't know it. And it was not their fault. They wanted it, but their preparation to be military chaplains was profoundly inadequate. So they had their religious education, they had their military chaplain training, but they didn't know warrior wisdom or warrior spirituality or religion or history. And so I worked very hard with them to restore that. And I had many experiences of working with chaplains who were nearly burned out. I don't know how to help our troops. And the work we did together, bringing the religious and spiritual dimensions of military service into their work, restored them so much that they stayed in the military and became re-inspired and realized how much chaplains could do and how necessary chaplains were to protect the souls of the warriors when they went through their time in hell.
I want to, by the way, your video is distorting. Your vocal is fine. I don't know if there's anything you can do on your end. Probably not. But um, it's interesting. I have a friend of mine who will remain anonymous who has been a chaplain for, oh, I don't know, 15 years now. Um, and he serves overseas and he's made an occupation and he makes a good living at it. Um, but it's interesting that they are playing a role in, but they're not. I mean, so you got a meat grinder going on, and you're there as the last hope because the people are already in there. They're in there whether they chose to be or whatever, and now they're in there, and so they're like the last bastion of spiritual hope that these people, these individuals are having. So I know that he works with different things and that kind of thing. But you're right. I don't think, and it's interesting that you've been accepted within the Pentagon, knowing that the Pentagon is the whole purpose of the Pentagon is to maintain empire, and there's a lot of darkness around that structure. Um, but you've been allowed, so I believe that's a God thing that you've been allowed. So talk to me how, in the midst of the Pentagon being, quite frankly, all about the industrial military academic complex that it is, and it needs its trillions of dollars to survive. It needs war to survive. The empire needs a war to survive. Because if we were in a truly all about peace and cooperation, which we could be, this world could be paradise, quite frankly, then a lot of jobs
Yes.
would be gone, a lot of contracts would be gone, and then they would have to reinvent themselves in a different way of thinking. So
Yes.
how is it that you're able to come in, they've accepted you knowing that you are there to help the wounding, but you also are like me, you're not a supporter of the military industrial complex, but you serve within it. So that's a very unique role because my friend who's a chaplain, quite frankly, he's rah rah bim boom ba. Let's go get those goblins, as he calls them. That's what he thinks of. He calls the Russians orcs. And I'm like, you have now degraded your fellow man to just like what the church has done throughout the centuries. Is it's like they are Neanderthals. We can kill them because they are lesser than us. And so, unfortunately, he hasn't bridged the gap where you and I are to understand that, hey, the other side is doing, they're the exact same as our side. They're all in there because they're being conscripted, enlisted, whatever, and they're in their empire. And it's not because they woke up and went, oh, I'm in an empire. I don't want nothing to do with it. You just explained why people go in, and then so talk to me about that. You're just working within that realm.
Yes. Yes. Uh, okay. Several dimensions of this. I want to share and affirm with you that it was the chaplains who first found my work and invited me into the military.
Very good.
So, yes, amen. So they had a religious and spiritual orientation, and they know how badly it's needed, and they're hurting because they are not treated within our military establishment as well equal in influence.
Yeah, you're right.
One of my many goals had been to try to help to influence uh, the role and reputation of the chaplains so that they would become as important in a warrior's evaluation as the psychologists and the medical doctors and the social workers. Like, yeah, and get a chaplain in there for the spiritual and religious health of that veteran and really make it a holistic team. So that was one of my goals. Unfortunately, our military really seriously lacks the wisdom for how to bring our warriors home and bring healing. And of course, I have to be careful in how I communicate when I'm with the military, and I am. You and I, are we sensitive guys kind of know how to get along with people,
Oh,
be
yeah.
diplomatic, and keep
Yes,
happy.
very much.
Yeah. Um, I have been very effective in communicating with the military how much I respect them and the warrior archetype and the original purpose of the warrior. And I don't teach as much when I would like to say, we don't need military anymore. Let's just live in a world of peace. And that's also my goal. I do take an earlier step and teach about the warrior archetype and its positive dimensions and its negative dimensions. And that the positive use of the warrior is strictly for preservation and protection, not for aggression and not for destruction.
Yes.
Secondly, all of us have a warrior archetype.
Yep.
You and I have it, Steve, and we are representing that to our friends listening today. We're trying to show moral use of force and demonstrate the moral use of military rather than the immoral and harmful use.
Yes.
So the military, many military people actually affirm this and want the military to be directed in a life-affirming way. So I can't mention this name either, or even I was on one of our largest military bases, 50,000 soldiers. And after my trainings, I was invited into the inner sanctum of the two-star general, the major general who was in charge of the whole base. And really inner sanctum, like we went through 3 layers of doors to get to his private office that he was sure was not bugged. And only when we were there, this is going to be a private luncheon between us because you're our special guest. We got there and he said, this isn't lunchtime, this is confession. I need to talk to you because I don't have anybody to talk to. And he broke down crying. So a 2-star general commanding 50,000 troops, what's wrong? I know these wars are wrong and I can't protect my troops. I have to send them into immoral, illegitimate zones of combat. And I know they're going to be severely damaged spiritually and
Wow.
psychologically and physically. Yeah. Yeah. So there's so many good people who don't want this. And you're right, we really would have to change the entire capitalist system of our country. People, our friends don't know this either. We really would have to change the law system. People know that when Eisenhower left office in his farewell address, he said, beware the military-industrial complex. Eisenhower originally wrote, beware of the military-industrial government complex. He knew by his time in office that the corporations and the military were calling the shots.
Yep.
His advisors pressured him to take the word government out. But it was true then and it's profoundly true now.
Yes.
And so the corporations are tragically making billions of dollars off the wars that are going on now and feeding them. And then back to our biblical and religious studies, way back. The sins of the parents will be visited upon the children unto the 3rd and the 4th generations.
Yes.
The only thing Moses got wrong was not the 3rd and the 4th generation, but on and on and on through.
Yes.
Right. Up until today, until
Yes.
we stop it.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. And you rightly said that from the moment Europeans got to this continent, we were empire building. So the first war on this continent, the King Philip's War, I live in Massachusetts. That war was here. I'm living on old Nipmuc land.
Yes.
the Turner Falls massacre, I forget the date, 1670 or something, was just like 10 miles up the road.
Oh, I have lost my guest, but I do not want to get off the air. He's coming back in. He's trying to get back in.
Uh,
There you
I'm
go.
back. Are we
You're back.
connected?
Yes,
Okay,
you
good.
are. You were explaining
So
about King Philip's 1670 or 1617.
uh, I don't remember exactly, the 70s, 1670s.
Yes, 1670s.
Shortly after the Pilgrims. Yeah. All right. That was a war of conquest. That war per capita had more casualties than any war in American history. More native people and more settlers were killed in proportion to their numbers in the population. And villages were destroyed, and uh, people were forced into what were called praying towns and forced to convert to Christianity or they would be murdered. It was hideous, and we've been doing that in our wars ever since. So the
Yes,
My Lai massacre in Vietnam or Abu Ghraib prison in
yes.
Iraq, well, that happened in the 1600s. We did it then. We've been doing it ever since. George Washington was as much at war against the Native Americans during the Revolution in his presidency as against the British. He said they had to be eradicated. Washington and his father were both given the Native American names village destroyer because they did. So yes, Steve, you're right. It's built into our culture. It's built into our way of life. It's built into the way we exploit the earth and other people and only go for power and wealth instead of the core humanistic and spiritual values. And we need to do everything we can to transform that and restore our spiritual values to our core, have ultimate values of what's good for the planet, for each other, for loving and caring about each other, for healing our warriors, no matter what it costs, rather than the crazy profit motive that everybody's chasing.
I it I've often thought that, and you just summed it up, but we're just suffering from thousands of years of PTSD all over the world. And
Yes.
that spiritual dark energy has never been released except for on individual bases. But as cultures go, there are these spiritual dark forces that keep whole societies, keep whole neighborhoods, keep whole communities imprisoned within their minds, within their souls, their shame and trauma and guilt, and just expand that. And so I'm amazed that the world actually does as well as it does, Edward. I really am, knowing that um, the amount of trauma built up and built into our DNA, quite frankly, into our genetic makeup. It's like, okay, we all know that somebody who is doing drugs, they have a drug baby, or you have fetal alcohol syndrome from somebody who's drinking alcohol while they had a baby. Well, I think we all have, and Christianity says the fall. Okay, well, it's it's it's
Yes.
it's passed on, and it takes great work of individuals like yourself, people like myself speaking out, and others, and there's countless people now doing it. But in my own realm, within the church realm, one person at a time, I'm like, okay, so what fruit are you bearing? Is it love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control? That's the fruit of the Holy Spirit. Or are you angry, wrathful, malice, murder, envy, slander, all this. I go, if that's your operation and you can justify our government being that way, then you're not operating in the Holy Spirit. You're operating in the flesh, as it says. You're operating in an unholy spirit. And even Ed, there's a passage where the disciples are with Christ and they go through this little village in Samaria, and they didn't want to let them stay because Jesus was on a mission to go to Jerusalem and be crucified, and they didn't want to stay there, so they were kind of miffed. And so the apostles say, hey, can we just pull down fire from above like Elijah did from old? And Jesus said in the King James Version, that's not of my spirit. What spirit are you operating in? And then he rebuked them. Most versions remove all that and just say, and he rebuked them. But there's this analogy that there's a spirit that had entered into them. And the fact is, God wasn't working that way. That was all the past. Jesus inaugurated a new kingdom, the Prince of Peace kingdom, one of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. That's the fruit. If you are following, that's the fruit. But yet the church itself, the very essence of the transformation that was taking place from the first century, second century, third century, through martyrdom, through transformation, all got brought under this umbrella of empire. And now it's hard even within the church to divide Christians from their solidarity with their country, with Israel, with whatever. And I'm trying to one person at a time just share, and I'm saying, okay, let's just get to brass tacks. Is that attitude align with, fruit of the Spirit? If not, you have to ask yourself why. And maybe it's time to turn away from that and quit making idols out of these things and come back. That's where I'm at. And what are you doing on your side to not only heal people, but speak out and try to help people to not support such a realm that we live in?
Well, I fully agree with you that a spiritual awakening is called for from the individual and the collective dimensions. And our beloved planet is in such distress that there's no time left just for individual one-on-one awakening. We need to awaken as many of us as we possibly can. And what a difficult challenge we have now. I am with you that we need to speak out as often, as much as we can. I'm with you that we need to see everybody as sisters and brothers and learn to talk to each other again.
Yes, yes.
And listen deeply to each other again. There's an African proverb that says, my enemy is one whose story I have not yet heard.
Oh, yes.
Instead of, I'm going to kill you because I disagree with your story, let's sit together in community circles and listen to each other's stories and understand where we're each coming from and why. There's an Eskimo healing tradition that I've used sometimes, where when there's trouble in the village, the two antagonists are called into the center of the village. The entire village surrounds them, so everybody witnesses this and holds them in a circle. And each of you get the turn to yell and scream and curse and put down the other one till you're empty. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. While the village witnesses, because we all know this is going on, only we're getting it out in public and we're containing you until you're clean inside. And they'll do this ritual until they're empty and they fall into each other's arms and laugh. Okay, it's over and the village is clean. I want us to do that in the United Nations. Yeah, anybody who was angry at me can scream at me and curse me for anything they want to, as long as they don't pick up a weapon and kill me, and I'll listen and try to understand and receive it. And then it's my turn to return back to you till we're clean. Um, there are so many ritual practices from the religious and spiritual traditions of the planet that I use, that we could use to introduce into our feuding communities. It's really important that all of us, no matter where we stand ideologically or politically, realize that everybody is being patriotic, even the people we completely disagree with, because all patriotism means is that you love and believe in your fatherland. It's not about the morality. It's not about the particular values. It's just that it's yours and you're loyal to it. So it's hard to say, but the people we call terrorists are as patriotic to their system as we are to ours. And so
100%.
right, we have to realize, no, this is not rational. It's not about arguments. It's not on the ideological level. Somehow we've got to get to the core levels with each other and listen and listen and listen and make room for all the disagreements without picking up weapons and without looking for power or profit from it. So I really, like you, I talk all that I can. And I'm working internationally, not just with Americans. I shared with you briefly, but we can share with our audience that my book, Warriors Return, has been translated and published in Russia. And it's being also presently also translated into Ukrainian. And I am meeting by Zoom with Russian psychologists and with Ukrainian military mental health officers, trying to help them learn how to reduce war trauma even as it's happening and not become berserkers. Like, this is really hard. One of my Ukrainian colleagues, who's a mental health officer, I originally joined to help treat war trauma and reduce the trauma. But after 2 years of this, I didn't hate the Russians when it began, but now I'm filling with hatred and starting to dehumanize them. Ed, let's talk about this so I don't do it, so I don't go that far and I don't become that cruel and hard inside. So we're trying. One of my mentors, my most beloved mentors, back to what we shared at the beginning, a literature professor I had as an undergraduate, the only professor I would call a mentor, not just a teacher, but a life guide. He was a World War II combat veteran. Harry Staley, listen. We spent a whole semester, just him and I, in independent study, reading the books that he had humped in his knapsack across Europe while he was fighting the Germans. Like he said, I kept Thomas Mann and Heinrich Heine and Goethe in my knapsack, reading them at night so I wouldn't hate the Germans, even though I had to fight them and try to kill them. That's the kind of lesson we need. Those are the kind of teachers we need. Don't dehumanize, rehumanize. And everybody realize whenever we're dehumanizing anyone, we are performing a violent act. We're taking their spirit from them and reducing them to a thing. And we've got to reverse that and restore everybody's humanity. And back to our veterans, as I work with them and they realize lives they took were good people doing what they sincerely believed was necessary, or just innocent bystanders got caught in it, and they grieve those lives that they took, and they pray for the souls, and they do it. And sometimes they'll set up altars in their home, or do I guide veterans in doing atonement work. Not just forgive yourself, but do something to help people like the ones you harmed and rebuild the world. Atone, at one, put the world back together. They do, they grieve the people they harmed. Sometimes they'll adopt them as a conscience, as a spirit guide. I took that man's life in Iraq when he was just a father trying to protect his children. I wrote him a poem. I set up an altar in my home for him. I'm going to remember him for the rest of my life as my conscience. So I act as a good Samaritan from now on, rather than as an angry, defensive American. And these people, when they go through such transformation, they become the most beautiful, moral, loving human beings. And what the kind of transformation you and I are hoping for and trying to help bring into the world.
You just gave me some hope, and you explained some of your methodologies, because it, when I started, I wrote a book called Breaking the Deception Code, and now I'm rewriting it because my publisher stole, basically didn't pay me. And I could have got angry, and actually I didn't. I just said, okay, it's God just telling me to go back, rewrite it, edit your book, shrink it, use this as an opportunity to grow and take over my own publishing. But when you start going down the dark valley of understanding the world around you, you can get very, very bitter. You can get very, very angry. And I talk about the 12 stages of awareness. And part of that is being angry. Part of it is then you go through your grief. And then you rise above it, and you eventually rise to peace. And then you do the cycle again and again. And when I really, really started delving into the whole Israel basically copying what the United States did and other countries have done, they went into the indigenous population of Palestine, who've been there for 2,000 plus years, and they're wiping them out, literally wiping them out.
Yes.
And there is a collective awareness of this now more than ever before. This has been going on since the Nakba and even before that. But 1948, Nakba, 750,000 people gets displaced. They go in, they slaughter, rape, pillage, plunder, and it's never quit. And I've had guests on here who've spent time over there. I won't go through that, but I know that within some of the people I listen to or I watch, there can be on my part or other part a very, very deep hatred towards Israel because of their evil, to the point of just evil. And I'm and I've had to walk through that and give it all over to the Lord and just say, look, they are blind. And Jesus has said this way. This is what Jesus said. He says, beware of the blind guides who lead the blind both into the pit. He says, don't be associated with that. Stay away from that. He wasn't afraid to name it, but he said, stay away from that. Don't engage in that, because they're blind. So I realize that the leaders of the United States, the leaders of Israel, the leaders of whatever group, they're blind. They're blinded by all the things we just have been discussing here of generational curse, generational brainwashing, generational spiritual forces, and they are operating not as Jesus. They're not operating as enlightened beings. They're operating at the core level as brutes. But yet they're still human beings. They're still like you and I. They're still humans. They're blinded. They're blinded by their rage. They're blinded by their passions. And they're leading others in the same path. And our job is to initiate prayer, initiate peace, initiate a wake-up call in a sense of trying to build enough people within our coalitions to not support it. Because I can't control what those people do over there. I can't even control what my neighbor does. I can only control what goes on inside Steve Johann. So I've adopted, okay, I pray for him now. Okay, if I'm angry, I just pray for him. I'm saying, stop it. I'm praying for peace. Because I do not want to become them. I do not want to become hatred and filled with hatred and pass around falsehoods. I just want to be operating in love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control, and in truth and in wisdom. And so I, like you, I've had to pull myself back and recognize that I cannot allow my anger towards actions to dictate my actions. And oh, we've lost my guest here. He's going to come back, I'm sure, again. He's having some technical difficulties on his I think his connection is probably in a pretty remote area. But folks, I wanted to cover one more thing with him, and I'm going to do it. But I'm just letting you know that when I get very involved in what I am involved with, and sometimes my emotions. Okay, there you go. Thank you for coming back.
We're back.
But I wanted to come back and allow you to share now. I, like you, have had to work through and get other people around me. Quite frankly, I don't have a lot of people around me who think in my terms. I've got a few more. God has brought more people into my circle of people, and I listen to people. I get people online, but I can't really share a lot of this at my church. I can't, because they're still very pro Zion, pro blah blah blah. But individually, there are people there now that are waking up, that I am speaking into their life, and they're going, "You're right, Steve, this is not right. How do we deal with this?" I go, gently grow, educate yourself, and move forward. And then you'll start influencing other. And maybe we can slowly leaven, put a little change the thing. But it won't happen by me making a phone call to the pastor and saying, "You can't." That'll just literally eliminate my ability to be the change agent. And so we're both had to work through these, haven't we?
Yes, yes. And it's hard work. And I'm with you. We really need to work on our skills at spiritual diplomacy to the maximum degree.
Yes, yes.
Keep all of the beautiful spiritual values in our core and watch the way we communicate and who we're communicating with very carefully so that we can share with them in a way that they might hear and receive.
Yes.
So you're doing it within the church. That's what I've had to do within the military. So yeah, I've got wonderful friends whom I love very much, who, full colonels and generals, who ultimately on the political questions we profoundly disagree, but on the moral and spiritual questions we are beautifully aligned. And so we're working together and getting there. Also, following your theme, we must talk to people with whom we have significant differences, but find a way to do it cooperatively. So as I shared, I'm working with Russian psychologists on Zoom and with Ukrainian military officers. I'm trying to get them to talk to each other, not just to talk to me. I'm in the middle, and they're seeing me as a bridge. And they're almost ready to say, maybe I'll talk to some of my counterparts in a peaceful way and not assume that they're an enemy. And we can start to build friendships even while the war is going on. That's incredible. It's incredible. I've been doing this work in reconciliation and healing and atonement with Vietnam for decades. So I've led American veterans, widows, children, spiritual seekers on journeys to Vietnam I began in 2000. I did it every year until the pandemic stopped it. So I've been to Vietnam 19 times. I've spent about a year and a half over there with several hundred Americans. And same thing, what we're talking about, getting people talking to each other. Where were you? Why were you here? What did you do? Maybe you met before under different circumstances. What do you need to say to each other? And see what happens is so beautiful. And how quickly the fear and hatred discharge into Quoting Viet Cong veteran, we're all brothers and sisters who survived the same hell.
Yes.
Another Viet Cong veteran to Americans. From now on and forevermore, American and Vietnamese veterans have to be the lips and the tongue of the same mouth telling the world the same story. Oh, we were all in this together. It was terrible for everyone. We all suffered, and we all have common forms of suffering, and we can help each other heal. So when we can get to that point, is it so beautiful. We can indeed reconstruct our world in love, as you're also saying and representing, in love, honesty, truthfulness, beauty.
I love it. The theme of reconciliation is something that I has been appearing on my show now for a while. I am all about reconciliation. I mean, that is the story of God reconciling man through Christ's action on the cross. That was about reconciling a angry creation towards the creator, and the creator says, I love you so much that I'm going to reconcile you back to me. And that is
Yeah.
the story of
Mhm.
the prodigal son who shook his fist at his dad and said, I'm going to get my inheritance. I'm going to go out and squander it. I'm going to live like a heathen, whatever. I want a heathen. Live just my own. I'm going to be my own king. And then he
Yes,
comes
sir.
back broken and says, I am so sorry. And the father says, look, 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 it's over with. That's the past. Come on in. I'm here. And that's the story of God wanting all of us to be reconciled with each other, no matter what
Yes.
the creed, color, race, age, sex. He wants us to be reconciled together. It's hard because human beings create shells around ourselves. We create walls around ourselves, and we don't want. I'll tell you, it's funny. I go to the gym a couple times a week. Sometimes I sit in the sauna, and I'm telling you what, there could be 5 guys in there, and it is silent because no one wants to say anything. They're all, I'm a man, I don't know. You go into an elevator, guys, they'll not say a word. Now,
Right.
girls, you go in the sauna, they're all just chatting away, chatting away. And it's men have a built-in reserved attitude of, I don't want you to know, I don't want to talk about anything. I didn't invite you to talk to me. So we have a lot of work to do. We do. And
Yes, yes, we do. Uh, I, I'll share a sauna story as well.
yes,
Um, I use them also. Um, I'm going to push this a little harder for the work we are doing and want to do. Uh, I have been trained and initiated in the Native American tradition. So I've been on vision quests. I've been through very many ceremonies. I've studied with the Native Americans how they used to bring their warriors home and reduce trauma from their communities. So I'll say a few things quickly to
yes.
respect our time. But all right. So regarding trauma, in the Lakota language, the Sioux people call what we call PTSD, their term is Nagi Napeapi, which means you'll love this, Steve. You'll use this. It means the spirits left him.
Oh,
It doesn't mean post-traumatic stress disorder. It doesn't mean broken brain. It means the spirit left.
yes.
And so the job of the healer in that tradition was to restore the lost spirit of the warrior.
Wow.
Okay. Among others, their medicine people were in charge of this. Okay. I brought this to the chaplains and they loved it. What do I do for our warriors? You have to restore their spirit. That's the wound. It's a soul wound. I
Yes.
call PTSD post traumatic soul distress,
Distressed. Yes.
post traumatic soul distress, and post traumatic social disorder. We're all out of order with each other and the soul is wounded. So, Sitting Bull and other healers in the native tradition were medicine chiefs of their warrior societies. Sitting Bull said, more important than being a warrior, more important than being the head chief, was that I was the medicine chief of the Hunkpapa Warrior Society, and it was my job to restore their traumatized spirits and restore the spirit.
Wow.
And they had many, many ceremonies for doing that, including the use of the sweat lodge. So I've been through sweat lodges. I've been trained in how to use it as a ritual. Another necessary step for healing and homecoming for warriors is intensive catharsis, purification, getting rid of all the negative emotions that we talked about earlier, the grief, the pain, the rage, and getting them out of your body. The sweat lodge is supreme for doing that. Sit in the sauna long enough and we can't hold it in anymore. And if there's a chaplain or a priest in the sauna with, or a therapist in the sauna with us, or a good friend and interviewer who gets us talking in the dark when our defenses are being sweat down and our resistance is being sweat down and the emotions are coming to the surface, oh my gosh, can we have really, really intense cathartic experiences. So when I run retreats, if the retreat center has a sauna, I'll take the warriors into the sauna and we'll spend hours in there using it like a sweat lodge to get the emotion out. Sometimes, since I have been initiated and I have permission to do this, I will run sweat lodges at a retreat. That's one of our healing practices. The key is that purification and cleansing are an absolutely essential step for homecoming from trauma. And if we don't do it, the toxins, the spiritual toxins stay inside us. And we're still operating out of that wounded place instead of out of an open, cleansed place. And then, so back to your beautiful reference to Jesus's teaching. We can fill with bad spirit as well as with good spirit. In my book, Warrior's Return, I looked really closely at the stories of King Saul and King David to demonstrate both of them had what we today would call PTSD.
Oh, big time. Just read the Psalms. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
really, right. The Psalms they're PTSD poems.
Yeah, you
Oh my gosh.
read the whole book of Lamentations. That's the laments.
Yes, right. So I have even if they say they're atheist or come from a different religious tradition, doesn't matter.
Nope.
Oh God, why have you forsaken me? You put me down in the dust. My mouth is full of worms. I can't say a word. Oh, David felt that way also? Me? I'm like King David. I'm in the same condition. Yes, you are. You're in really good company.
Yes.
You're not cursed. You're being awakened by being shown the deepest suffering of life so you can find spirit and restore and rise up again. So write your psalms, write your poems. Let's hear your lamentation and keep writing it, and we'll keep singing it to us until we can get through to the other side together. It works. Oh, and back to Saul for a moment. At least three times in his story, when we're told about his rages, his going berserk, the Bible says, the Spirit of the Lord left him, and an evil spirit sent by the Lord entered him.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Right. Okay, so PTSD is being possessed by that evil spirit, and it is also of the divine. And we need to cleanse that and get God's loving spirit back in us. And it isn't rational, can't talk or think.
I know, but it's real.
It's so real. Oh, it's so real.
Yeah. I do a lot of deep studies on that. After I get my book, I'm also in writing about the spirit physical realm and how they intersect, and that's exactly perfectly and it's interesting when you say the Lakota are talking about the spirit of the spirit of man has left him. It is, and it's the
Yes.
same picture of what happened in Saul's situation. And that's why
Yes.
there's so many people. It's like, well, I tell people God wasn't just for the Jews. God was for everybody. And he showed up at every tribe, every tongue, every nation had God. And he showed up and he shared. And I believe the pre-incarnate Christ, and even to this day, showed up in their own way, in his communication with them. You even see this in scripture where at Abraham, he's the chosen one to bring about the ultimately the redemption of man, but it's through a seed, Jesus. But he runs into a guy named Melchizedek. Melchizedek played such a huge role in that realm that Abraham gave him a tenth of everything he had. Well, who is this Melchizedek? God's working far beyond Abraham. And we as Christians have been brainwashed for 2,000 years thinking that it's that he only worked in this small group called the Jews. And I'm like, he was working everywhere. You go back and you look at the ancient, I was watching something on YouTube. The ancient Chinese alphabet contains the stories of creation just the same as Genesis. And many,
Mhm.
many nations, many tongues have the roots of all this. It's not like it was left unknown. And we get so myopic in our view that we forget that God is working. He doesn't want anyone to be strayed. And so when you talk to me about Lakota saying that the spirit has left that man and we need to bring him back, it's the same picture that you used in your book about Saul. And I'm like, these are just universal truths that are in front of our face. This is just
Yes.
amazing
Yes.
how this
Yes.
all works together. And it's not science, it's the spirit. And we live in a spiritual realm.
Yes.
I love it. This is, and can people find in your books these processes? Have you laid out some of this stuff
Oh,
in some of
yes,
your books?
quite extensively. In especially, well, in War in the Soul and Warrior's Return, I lay out the processes for the warrior's healing journey. I introduce and teach the traditions from numerous cultures around the world. Judeo-Christian tradition, of course, also the Greek, the Vietnamese, the Native American, African traditions, Asian traditions. So I really like you, and like you just affirmed, we are both affirming that these are universal matters that have appeared in all cultures, all times, and all places. Unfortunately, made localized because that's what we human beings do. Has to come through our language and our thought processes and our times. But you and I and many people are working back to the universal level. So my books contain the universal levels and collect from all world traditions that I could possibly have the time and energy to study and to bring in, how what they did and how they practiced trauma, profound healing of violent trauma, and how we can use them now, and how you can run a retreat, how you do these exercises, what other how other cultures did them, what modern versions of them look like, and lots of stories of people who have been through them and how profoundly they've transformed.
I love it.
So yes,
I'm gonna get one or both of those books, no doubt about it. I'm deeply I've read numerous books on on s- on just healing and on emotional, psychological. Just since in my 20s, I started globbing on to understanding the psyche of man and these things. And it's very attractive to me to understand that. And it helps me enter into it. You've had a wonderful role, Edward. And by the way, folks, just go to Edward Tick, TIC, EP21.com, and you can find all of his great information there. And you do.
Thank you. But excuse me, Steve, it's TICK.
Oh, is it TICK? I will get that
It is.
fixed.
Thank you.
How did I miss that one?
Oh,
Well,
we
I'll
can
fix
make
that.
jokes
I'll fix
about
that on the
that, but that's
description. It'll be corrected. So Edward Tick, I am asked my other shows that I produce that they Steve's got a terrible way of messing up words. But so before we let you go, I want us to just cover a couple other things. I wrote down kind of a soldier's journey, and then you can kind of piggyback on this. I was like, okay, drafted or enlisted. Then comes the conditioning.
Mhm.
Comes the service. Then
Mhm.
comes the engagement. Then there's the trauma. Then the aftermath. Back to civilian. And then you bury your deeds. You justify yourself. Things rot in your bones. And then you deal with it through what are the outcomes and PTSD, addiction, anger, re-up on your patriotism, highly re-up on it, uh, death through suicide, overdose, alienation, broken relations, repeat the cycle by suppressing, inability to accept guilt and actions and find healing, and on and on. So I wrote this before we even started, and you've already kind of talked us through all these things, but it's interesting how God leads these things.
Yes.
Talk to me about that, because that is, I believe, the process that people go through in the military, and it can even be, let's say, it can even be the girl who was at a party she shouldn't have been, and she gets raped, and
Yes.
then she walks through life knowing that, and
Yes.
or she got raped, and then or she was with a boyfriend who said you got to have an abortion, and they didn't want to, but they did, and then they have that guilt, and they carry that throughout their whole lives. And I tie in one thing that I didn't put in there, but I truly believe the lot of early deaths, be it cancer, be it heart, be it whatever, is tied back to what you were talking about, is this toxins that have built up, emotional, spiritual trauma toxins that have never been dealt with. And these people can be the most wonderful people on the outside, but they have held this in, and now they're dying from cancer. Because
Yes.
what's your idea on that?
Yeah. I profoundly agree with you, and I could tell lots and lots of stories of people discovering the true wound in their depths rather than the medical manifestation of that spiritual wound. So I agree, and we could confirm it. I won't tell stories now because of our limited time, but I will comment. Hippocrates, the father of scientific medicine, he came from a lineage of priests, by the way, his father and his grandfather, and he learned medicine from them first. He said, all illnesses begin in the soul and end up in the body. And Steve, you just said the same thing. Thank you. And he also said that our illnesses come from small daily sins against nature that eventually accumulate in us till they manifest as a major illness.
So repeat that one. Small
The first
sins,
one, yeah.
small sins against
Illnesses
nature.
illnesses begin as small daily sins against nature that over time accumulate in our body and mind until they appear as a fully developed illness. So it takes a long time to grow our cancers. It takes a long time to be heartsick and soul sick and so disillusioned and brokenhearted that we're giving our body the messages of they don't even want to be here. And eventually it emerges as an illness, but then it's treated as a medical condition rather than a holistic spiritual condition.
And then the medical condition doesn't solve it because you go to all the treatments, you do all these things, and you end up still dying because ultimately you didn't deal with the core issue, which was everything we
Right.
just said. I
Yes.
carried two things in two little verses in my from Proverbs, and it says, "An anxious heart weighs a man down, but a kind word cheers him up." And then the other one is, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life." And I would quote that daily, every day when I was dealing with some depression and anxiety. And I finally find out through my nature path that I just didn't have the right combination of D vitamins and B complex, and I got on those, and within 3 months, I've had no more issues. So it was it was
Good.
a, I wasn't getting the nutrition, but I also understand too, because I've wrestled with guilt of my own past and worked through that many years ago, of handing that all over to the Lord and working through it and praying for anybody I might have harmed and people that have harmed me and releasing them and not holding any grudges, not hanging on to that. And it set me free. I am so light. I walk around very light. I don't have, my shoulders aren't drooping. I'm not stooped over. I don't carry any remorse or guilt. But I I carry that knowledge of what you were just saying. This that in and I've read this by so many different authors now about once it starts up here, it just ends up in your body.
Right.
This
Yes.
is powerful stuff. I mean, this is
It's very
powerful stuff.
powerful. So returning to how you mapped the warrior's journey in our modern society, that was very accurate, very, very accurate. And I want to make a comment about it. I did a similar thing in my book, Warrior's Return. There's a full roadmap of the warrior's journey. However, you got it right for if there's not good healing and spiritual intervention, when we return from the underworld and try to come back on our own and into this kind of society, we're wrecked. Okay, so we take the same roadmap and overlay the hero's journey. So the departure and the initiation and time in the underworld are all there and part of the journey. But the return journey, which Campbell taught, is actually the hardest part of the journey because we've changed, but society hasn't. Everybody just wants the same person home, and we're so different. So that's where we really need the help and the intervention. And so, in most of my work with warriors, and by now thousands of them, they already they went through the departure and the descent into the underworld, and I catch them in the return when they can't. And that's when we do purification and the sweat lodge and storytelling and restitution and
Right.
charity works and forgiveness of each other and forgiveness of the other and going overseas to meet them if possible. So we're changing the return journey by giving the warriors really what they need to return. And we're not trying to make them civilians again because they can't be.
No.
We're continuing the spiritual journey and we're teaching them to become elder spiritual warriors who are always working for peace and harmony and representing love. And Scouts Honor, it works and they become the most beautiful people and they spread it.
Yeah, one of my favorite friends, he's worked through this kind of thing, and he was a sniper in Vietnam. And when he came back, he was shambles because he knew what he had done, and it took him off the deep rails. Eventually he found healing and he found total healing, and then he started giving back and he helps others. But if he tells you, if he's very emotional, he's like you and I, he will cry at a drop of a hat when something touches him. I'll do the same thing. um but he helped me through some of my when I was dealing with some anxiety and depression, and he gave me this cycle of thing of attempt and fail and or try and relearn. And I was on the tempt, fail, death to self kind of cycle. And he said, no, it's attempt, fail. What did you learn? Get back on it and try it again. Oh my gosh, it just opened my mind. And and I had it on my wall for a couple years just as a reminder. But just little insights. Hopefully today somebody's listening. They can share this show with somebody that's going through, who is a soldier, who is somebody who has been through in the military or who's been through trauma. I want you to share this show because this is powerful stuff, folks. This is powerful stuff that what you're hearing today can open up avenues of your mind that you never thought about and get you on that journey because we're just introducing information. Edward, you're introducing information, but this is about helping people now go into that journey, and they can go to your website, edwardtick.com, and find lots of good information. And I know you do seminars um, as well. Do you ever do
Yes.
anything like Zoom seminars where people can uh,
Oh,
sign
yes.
in or
All the
become a
time.
part of it?
I do Zoom seminars. I do seminars in person. I speak at conferences. I travel a lot. I lead immersion journeys to both Greece and Vietnam. So you can be on the road with me for 10 days, 2 weeks, and do this work in person in the sacred sites where it really happened. And we achieve extraordinary dimensions of transformation. So there's many different ways that I work with people, and I'm just enthusiastic as you are to do this work and help bring back light and spirit as much as we possibly can.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on with me, Edward. This has been a wonderful thing. It's I've learned put a few notes down and then just start talking because you'll trigger something, I trigger something, and all of a sudden the dialogue happens and we're just having a discussion, and God's always in the midst. Creator is always in the midst. He's working through each one of us. And so Edward, thank you for joining me. I look forward to staying in touch, and I'm definitely going to get your book, one of them, and read through it because it will help people out. Um, is there any parting words you
Thank
want to
you.
give before I do our sign off?
Well, sure. To our audience, did you hear Steve? Please share this, spread the word, and keep being workers for light and spirit. Let us all know and affirm that even though our world is in trouble and in very dark times, the light is always there, and that the divine is always trying to call us. And so we all need to be light workers together, helping restore the divine to this beautiful planet. And thank you very much, Steve, for inviting me for doing it together. I hope to see you again as well. And I thank and encourage and bless you in your work for continuing to preserve and spread light and spirit. And
Well,
so I thank Spirit for bringing us together.
amen. Well, thank you so much, Edward, for joining us, and thank you everybody for following and watching us. And I want to say, guys, if you like what we're doing, just share and like the show and give it out to all your friends. And as I like to end, remember, be a lion and not the prey.